Good evening. If you're tuning in tonight, Australia have won their 6th ODI International World Cup. Who'd have thought it? I'm Rob Taylor. He's George Bottomley. We're the 212th men. You kind of said to me, Bot, before a semi-final had taken place, if there's one team you think can unravel India, it's the Aussies. The Aussies have completely wiped the floor of India in the final. Nobody saw it coming. India a runaway train. And cricket obviously produces moments like that for us. Moments like that for Travis Head.
Yeah.
Can I just sort of get a feel of how you thought of that final? I mean, I was travelling back from the south of England. I was still invested into this game. I caught the morning and I caught the rest on the long journey home. But you watched ball by ball, didn't you, more or less? So I'm keen to get your take.
Yeah. It reminded me very much of England's 2021 Euros final against Italy.
Football, yeah?
Football.
Talk me through why you think that.
England obviously score early on, well in it, and then that juggernaut of experience of a nation that's been there, done it in the big games, just crank themselves slowly into a match, start to pull it away from you, and almost kind of the home fans in Wembley and the home fans in Ahmedabad having that realization, feeling that panic, that hush around the stadium. It really felt like just experience showing its value.
It's a surreal moment for people in this country because I feel the majority of the people were backing the Aussies, which is like I said, it's a surreal position for an Englishman to be in.
Yeah.
But there's something funny and there's something humorous about a tournament that is so choreographed for the home nation to win. Call it what you want, pitches, stadiums, attitudes of other teams, I think, towards the hosts in terms of respect, in terms of almost understanding the role they're playing in the tournament, to, India being, like I said, completely dominant in all those games. And then in the final hurdle, a team there that can pluck them from the jaws of victory.
Yeah.
I must admit, I mean, when I caught the morning session, something told me, Pat Cummins comes in and says, I'm going to bowl first, which was
brave.
I mean, whenever I think of like a pressured scenario of a toss where, you've got 100,000 fans there, it always makes me think of back to Michael Vaughan when he talks in the 2005 Ashes to sort of say, he knew that the odds were against him, so he said, I was just going to bat first, and then I weren't going to chance it with Shane Warne, almost like accepting the jeopardy behind what he was about to do. And Pat Cummins, much alike his character and his outlook towards cricket and life, which is a different contrast to past Australians. It was a remarkable decision.
Yeah, no, it's really brave. And when you think, were they 70 after they're going at 8? Straight off the bat. Gill obviously goes relatively early for 30 for 1, but after about 8 overs, they're going at like 70 for 1. They're in prime position. Kohli's at the crease. Sharma's going well. It's a brilliant catch from Head. I mean, that's one thing I did feel about the Aussies on Sunday, was the fielding was electric. Warner, Labuschagne, Head, just busy in the field. In contrast, not to talk about England, really, because it isn't a podcast about England, this really. But if I think about England's team being an old team, looking a bit laboured in the field, Australia are a similar age, but really lively in the field, well up for it.
They spotted an opening, didn't they?
Yeah.
Wherever they found themselves, they got off to a terrible start. They were absolutely tated by India in the first game, lost to South Africa, I think, in the second game, and then found a little bit of form, and it can just sort of open up to you nicely, can't it? I think they knew that history was on their side a little bit coming into the latter stages of tournaments, and they spotted that there may be a mental frailty amongst India coming into a drought of wins. And I must admit that the point I was going to make before I went on to the Pat Cummins kind of monologue, if you like, I just when those early wickets went of Australia and I saw them buoyant in the field, that's you sense a sort of turn of momentum. And that's where I kind of thought this is going to be a scenario here now where India have not been used to this tournament, which is almost kind of saying, this is where you kind of need a loss in those group stages. You're not in the group stages. Yeah, you know what I mean? You kind of need to get something out your system. You need a shaky sort of, collapse against a Sri Lanka or a Bangladesh. Just get it out your system, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they found themselves in territories which they've not been in since England. When David Willey was probably, was coming down hard and Colley went early. It forced players like Sky and Rahul to sort of think, hang on, I'm going to actually bat a little bit differently. This is not all out demolition derby.
Yeah.
This is conservative final. Let's not let our heads fall off. We need to post something respectable.
And I think that although we've been rightly very complimentary of the India side throughout this tournament, they always had 4 bowlers in the lineup that couldn't hold a bat. You've got Shami coming in at 8. So I feel like
they were built for demolition, weren't they? They were built for big ass total. 400 on the board, Kohli 100. All the glitz and glamour, and then Shami 10-pin bowling, skittling people out, which is that's ranked true, hasn't it, in the group stages?
And Australia just chip away at that top order. Cummins getting Kohli feels like a massive wicket.
Mm-hmm.
Then Rahul's going nowhere.
There's no massive science to this bowling, though, is it? It's just kind of pretty standard, decent line and length.
That's one thing. A mutual friend texted me on Sunday and asked the question. England have obviously recently gone to a view of specialist white ball players, specialist red ball players, and maybe not having the same blend as other nations. When you look at particularly Australia, India, Pakistan, New Zealand, the test side and the white ball side are very similar. My reflection on that was, particularly in the bowling stocks, good bowlers are good bowlers in all formats. And I think you really saw that on Sunday was pretty standard red ball bowling.
The big 3.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Hazelwood, Stark, Cummins. I mean, for me, we'll come on to Australia in a little bit, and we're going to talk about this generation because they aren't, they've stamped their own piece of history, haven't they, with that final win. But I look at Stark, as one particular example, and I think he's such a massive component in white ball cricket.
Yeah.
He has the ability to, get Rohit Sharma early.
Yeah.
I always think back to the last World Cup Australia won in Australia and New Zealand, and McCullum was the player of the tournament. I think in the final, bang, gone, bowled. Was it first ball, something like that? That is him in the early stages of bowling in innings and the latter stages is a huge weapon, and I think it's his legacy in himself. And that's before you get on to Pat Cummins, arguably the best bowler in the world, and Hazelwood, that has kind of just evolved into now one of the world's greatest white bowlers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
White ball bowlers. You know what I mean?
And on the Stark thing, I always think with Stark, he's the one that I would take for an England lineup. That left arm, 90 mile an hour swing bowler. They're the ones that can, I think at one point he does start to rattle through the tail of India, and it just turns a game. Cummins keeps you in it. Hazelwood keeps you in it.
Yeah.
Zampa is a quality leg spin, not at the best tournaments, but
fielded well.
Fielded well.
He's caught some really important catches.
They've just got a nice balance, haven't they, really? And keeping Smith and Labuschagne in the side in India felt like a bit of a light bulb moment.
I think it's allowed people like Head and Maxwell to relax, hasn't it?
Yeah.
They are anchors, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? And the final was set so perfectly for Labuschagne just to play his own game. You couldn't have actually asked for a better 2 at the crease. Maybe, Smith as well, obviously. But when Travis Head, and he's had the innings of his life, I know he's had some great hundreds and Ashes and stuff, but to do this on this stage is phenomenal for him. But to have someone like Labuschagne at the other end, do you know where you can just play your strokes and he's going absolutely nowhere. And he's arguably one of the world's best at obviously, cemented himself into his wicket and letting them play.
After the Smith years, Smith's obviously coming to the tail end of his career now. Head and Labuschagne are going to be the 2 that they really need to build the side around. 40 for 3, Australia were in their innings. I don't think there's another team in this tournament against India
in that final.
In a final, turn it around from there. I think most teams capitulate.
So you're a South Africa 40 for 3 there. Do you think the 150 all out?
They ain't got a chance. I just don't. I think the atmosphere overwhelms them.
It sucks them in a little bit.
Yeah, New Zealand again, can't see it. England would be living on a Stokes miracle.
Yeah,
at best.
Agreed.
Can't see it.
So what do you put it down to then?
What, from an India perspective?
No, from an Australia perspective, I suppose. How they managed to, what is it, that's allowed them to overcome this? Is it just a flash of brilliance? Is it a mentality thing? Is it them exploiting India in some way?
Should we do this Australian generation first and then take India second?
Yeah.
So
So what's the narrative here, Bob?
I suppose the narrative really is this generation have come through probably from we were just discussing it off 2015.
It's a grand civil war, this, isn't it?
Yeah. So this really feels like two eras between Australia and England. I know sometimes we can be a bit England-centric, but equally matched, very evenly matched. Similar ages. You've got Stark, Hazelwood, Cummins, Smith, Warner, Khawaja to a certain extent. That's kind of your bedrock.
To give the listeners context, if you want to mark this from two particular guidelines, being when Joe Root is made Test captain, so we're past the days of Alistair Cook. You're probably looking at, in terms of seniority, you're looking at Bairstow's, tail end, Twilight, Broad and Anderson's, Stokes, Root, obviously Root is captain, and
Butler,
I think
would be in that from the white balls.
Butler, from a white ball perspective, Adil Rashid, Plunkett, these kind of people. And then from an Australia, to sort of that turn that on its head, we're looking at the Australia features from perhaps the 2015 World Cup. We'll probably give them a few years grace, 2013. So you've got Hazelwood, Stark, Cummins, like you said, Smith, Warner, Labuschagne. Brad Haddin maybe a bit before that, he sneaks in.
I suppose Haddin's not in this generation, is he? But when you compare the two generations across England and Australia,
who's had the better sort of decade and a bit, would you say?
This Australia team is starting to pull away, aren't they? If you think about what they've done over the last year or so, England haven't held the Ashes now for 10 years.
But Australia have stopped the rot on tours, haven't they?
Yeah.
They had a good few years of going to England
and they have been
never looking like retaining.
They've been unlucky. If I think about 2019, they were unlucky, really, probably not to win that one.
Yeah.
They won the World Test Championship this year, beat India. They won the
T20 World Cup.
T20 World Cup,
Abu
the
Dhabi.
one that was in the UAE.
In COVID.
And
two white ball World Cups, ODIs.
Yeah. So very similar. England have obviously won an ODI World Cup in that time. That you could say on an Ashes front, they've held off the.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you kind of does sandpaper sort of kind of take this a little bit in some ways? If what I'm saying is, if sandpaper wasn't there, is this generation viewed a lot differently? I suppose there's been quite a few captains involved since then, hasn't you? You've gone from your Smith era to Payne, which was a bit of a stopgap, and I think Cummins is the better side of that, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? You've got Australia were a very Australian side, weren't they, with Smith as captain? And I think as obviously used Tim Payne as, like we say, a bit of a bridge to that, and then a new era with Pat Cummins. They have evolved in the team they should have become. There was a lot of talk about this before, saying, is this Australian team just that team that's never quite made it? And I think in 2023, they have demonstrated significant strides. I think the only thing, and I've heard this from speaking to Australian peers of mine, is that just to have that Ashes win will be good, and whether this generation will be able to long it out for another tour of England, I don't think so. You're going to lose a couple of them in there.
And where would you rank this Australian generation against other Australian generations? I know it's tricky because we're not at the end.
You talk about silverware, and I know that the T20 World Cup is probably featured more for the older group, not the older group, but the most recent one we're used to seeing on TV now. The silverware is not too differential now, is it? I know, you can. There's kind of like I always use Steve Waugh as a little bit of a passing the baton kind of thing around the millennium. And then you get towards Ponting kind of era, that sort of thing. But they're probably, I'd say, another semi-decent year off being more or less on par.
So if you think they won the World Cup in 2015, they won the T20 World Cup in 21, and they won this one in 23. So those 3 World Cups. I think that the Ponting War years, I think they might have won 3 back-to-back. So you could argue that if they won the T21 in the West Indies and America next year, then they would start to be getting par, if not going past, on a silverware perspective, particularly given that they've won the World Test Championship this year. I suppose the one thing that they'd be really after, which this team aren't going to get, this generation won't get, I suppose is probably why they were so gutted in the summer, was an away Ashes. And then they would really be getting up there to the Ponting years.
I don't think it's too outrageous to say that this current Australian side probably had the edge with the ball, and the older generation probably had the edge with the bat.
Well, did he have the edge over the bat? Because you've got Warne, you've got McGrath, probably the two best ever in their disciplines.
Yeah, but I'm thinking as a collective, I think do the big three just give you much more variation and much more tools to sort of unlock all conditions.
You got Lyon.
Do you know what I mean?
A generational talent. They haven't had a finger spinner like that.
Yeah.
Very often in Australia.
It's once you go past Warne and McGrath, I think the rest are replaceable with the current crop.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They won't look out of place in that team. And I think as cricket's gone on and as the game's developed, these three individuals have found ways to adapt their own games to make them more multi-format. The question is, would those players have been as multi-format? You could argue they could. You never know, I suppose, did you?
Do you think that Australia manage their players better? So I know that earlier this year we were talking about Australia never play. They didn't play an away series for they didn't really play any cricket for a year, best part of the year.
They had a COVID gap when they politically sort of frozen out from cricket a bit.
Yeah, and didn't play any away tours. And they don't, particularly Cummins and Stark, their bowlers, they don't really play in the IPL very often.
They're quick to sacrifice franchise duties for Australian duty, aren't they?
Do you think that they're managing their big players, given that those big three bowlers have been fit every time? Whenever there's a big tournament, whenever there's a big series, they usually have their best 11 on the park.
Yeah.
If we think about England, that isn't the case. Is that luck, or do you think that they manage it better?
I think there's elements of luck in there. I also think climate helps a lot. I think, living in a hotter country with more access to warmer conditions, and it must be better for the body in total. I don't know whether England is sort of hampered by that, but I think it must. I think it won't be outrageous to say that does come into play a little bit. A bit of luck, but there's also it's hats off to these as individuals. I think they looking at them as what they are. We've entered an era where I think fitness is a lot more closer to people's priorities than it ever has been. I think a lot of these have made certain life decisions. I think to sort of prolong the careers, etc. They've chosen wise personally. So I don't think it's as much as a central way of the individual cricket systems managing them. I think these people as individuals have looked after themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it probably is more luck than judgment with these things. If Jofra Archer was playing for Australia, would he have got the elbow injury? Probably would have, and would still be out. It's one of those things.
I think just to sort of look at this, it's not completely out of the question to call this Australia's biggest ever feat in cricket. Winning a World Cup in India with all the odds against them, with a team that was, let's be honest, thrown together, and it was. I got it wrong. I said that they were quite samey. I thought, it's a bit Groundhog Day. It's your Warner's opening and Smith's in there, and you've got your Hazelwood, lavish Hazelwood, Stark, Cummins. It's all a bit familiar. But if anything, I think familiarity and knowing each other's games and knowing your own systems and knowing your teammates has actually probably been the formula for Australia's success.
That final is cricket's equivalent of Galatasaray away, isn't it, really? There's 100,000 people in the stadium, not a single Aussie there, baying for metaphorical blood. India get off to a flyer with bat and ball. It takes some strength and resilience to come back from that. And I suppose one thing that really kind of was the picture of what they were up against was the trophy presentation. It's a mockery, really. It's an ICC tournament.
Yeah.
And it's almost the equivalent of what you do when you were 10 years old in your back garden.
For those who haven't seen this, Modi, the Prime Minister of India, very powerful man in geopolitics these days.
Yeah.
This feels very. I mean, I'm told that Pat Cummins is basically on the the grandstand stage, isn't he? Waiting to receive the trophy. None of his players are accompanying him. Modi walks up with the trophy, and he's alongside him.
I don't know. Somebody,
some
delegate.
Some suit, some official, and he hands him the trophy, and then just kind of like almost gives him like a delicate pat on the wrist, and then walks away.
Yeah,
and
the fireworks start going off.
Fireworks start going off. None of the
Time.
Australian team are there. Pat Cummins looks like John Travolta off Pulp Fiction, looking around, kind of confused to saying what happens next. It just sort of, I was told that Modi was then making his way to the rest of the Australian team and shaking all the hands.
Yeah.
Maybe that's quite a good, clever PR sort of kind of chuck in there. But it was almost a little bit like Modi was brought to this stadium that's named after himself to present Rohit Sharma alongside his pal Virat Kohli, and this being a grand moment for India. It's perfectly aligned 10 years after Tendulkar does the same feat. And it was all just a little bit kind of uncomfortable, wasn't it?
It had an air of petulance, didn't it, really?
Yeah.
It did. Now...
It's funny. It really is, because it's...
I think the ICC need to have a word with themselves if they want to be a respected body. That I don't think there'd be many World Cups.
Yeah.
In any sport, and cricket is the second most watched sport on earth.
Factual.
Yeah. And that is the presentation of the ultimate victory, the World Cup. And it's just a, chucking of the trophy.
It's kind of you've won, but at what cost, kind of thing, isn't it? It's kind of like it's kind of where your dad makes you shake hands with the person who just beat you at table tennis on a cruise ship, because you've thrown a strop, and he's saying no, you will do, and your dad's walked over and gone, he is pleased for the game, thanks very much, and he's walked off. That's how it felt, and it kind of it leaves a bad taste, because I think this tournament on the whole, there's been some good moments, but if I was to summarize it, we'll come on to favorite moments. But I guess to give you the sort of less aesthetically side of this, ticket fans have been secondary in terms of getting tickets.
Scheduling's
piss poor. The ground,
some of the grounds are in bad shape.
These are IPL grounds. Does it look now where like there was debris falling from the ground onto
Dharamsala's outfield was questioned by multiple teams that played there. What was the changing the pitch?
Yeah, that just stinks, doesn't it? You know what I mean?
Now, India, it's almost the fate of the gods, isn't it?
Yeah.
In some ways,
they command a lot. I know they hold a lot of weight in cricket. I know that cricket is very lucky to have India in terms of how it propels it as a world sport. The reason why it is the second most factual, popular sport in the world is inherently because of India.
Yeah, and deservedly, they deserve to win this tournament. They're the best team. They're on home soil. It was
completely parallel to how England deserved to win the World Cup in the last.
However, sometimes things come around and bite you, and when you try to change the pitches, and you're not bothered about the scheduling, and everything feels like it's a little bit of making a point that this is secondary to the IPL. The ICC don't have the weight that the BCCI do. Sometimes that comes around, and you get taught a lesson, and I don't know. It's just a shame, because a World Cup in India should be a brilliant spectacle.
Yeah.
You should have fans from Australia, England, knowing the schedule up front, being able to travel there. Imagine going watching a match in Dharamshala.
I'm going to do it in March.
Yeah, the privilege that would be in the World Cup. Going to Ahmedabad, that new massive stadium, like a huge stadium for cricket. The size of the MCC in India, again, should be a brilliant spectacle. Or whether you go to Mumbai and you go to the Wankhede Stadium, again, the Wankhede Stadium. The history at that ground and everything else. It should be a really good advert for cricket.
They've got an amazing platform, haven't they, just to sort of demonstrate that this is their sport, this is their game, and it's their adoptive game. They've took the reins of it, they've picked up the baton. But at the end of the day, for all the grandstand and the Prime Minister being there at the world's biggest cricket stadium, it's not the biggest sports stadium in the world, it could be. They came up against a gritty winning machine, didn't they? They came up against someone who had the number.
Yeah.
And on the day, were comfortably better.
And with teams like Australia, we know it. Like we saw it in the
How many times were we on the Ashes where we thought we were on top and Australia pulled us back every time?
Don't give them
inch.
give them any more ammunition than they already do. Do you know this summer when we were getting too big for our boots?
Yeah,
Crawley's in the media giving it bigger.
Same.
Robinson
will be declaring on 700 after
Robinson's
day one.
in the media giving it the bigger. They start off like a train.
Yeah.
And as soon as we start to shut up and get a bit more sensible, you've got a chance against them.
Yeah.
Again, I think that, India have kind of learned the lesson that we learned in the Ashes is if you try pushing your luck too much with teams like Australia knocking around, it just gives them more ammunition and more drive to win.
And I think one of Cummins' best traits as captain is he's very clever in the media. He's very clever at what he says.
Neutral.
Oh, he could have come out and sort of said that, India, they've done well so far, but they're not going to do it against Australia. Yeah. He came out and said, what's really good here? Shutting this crowd up.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they were the biggest telling thing for me is I was on the motorway driving down from Bournemouth, and Travis Header's got his 100. And Jonathan Agnew described it as if he just knocked a single to fucking square leg.
Yeah.
And it was just like, and that brings up Travis Head's 100. You couldn't hear a thing in the crowd. Yeah. And the fanatical nature of these people. And I've seen some serious, I don't want to name them because, they're sort of like ornaments of cricket in many ways, that where they put themselves in the game. But I've seen senior Indian correspondents, ex-players, who are coming across as really bad losers again.
Yeah.
And I get that cricket is a bigger thing in India than it'll ever be anywhere in the world. Yeah. And people there love cricket more than I will ever understand.
Yeah.
But it falls back down to it. At the end of the day, it's sport and there will be a winner and there will be a loser.
Yeah.
And this wasn't scripted. This wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
It's happened. And, India are going to have to learn from this. Which brings us on to the next topic, doesn't it?
Yes.
What is it?
Why are India failing in the knockout rounds of tournaments?
So where are we at with India now? When was their last piece of silverware?
Their last silverware
ICC.
was the Tendulkar win in Mumbai. I think it might be Wankhede, not Wankhede.
Yeah, we'll come back to
that. But yeah, when Kohli said
Kohli was young, wasn't he? And he was next to him, interviewed, and it was a passing of the baton, and that was supposed to happen kind of here in many ways. And the Shubman Gills of the world would look back on this and say, "This will be me." Well, we're not far off, but a new tournament being devised where we all just play India until India win. It's quite phenomenal, really, because you look back and there's teams like West Indies that have picked up an ICC, major trophy in that timescales, and the thought of West Indies winning a tournament like this is kind of like it'd be unforeseen now, wouldn't it? A team like that going all the way. Wish them well. Hope they get better soon. But yeah, where's it going wrong for India? I said to you when you were talking, I mean, I've been wrong about a lot of things, but where your expectation was that India would just coast this completely right through to the final. They were flawless in many ways. The thing I said, and it's kind of like where this starts for me, the entire weight of expectation and the expectancy that India will win has, for me, caused them to trip up. Yeah. It's the kind of almost like being bewildered that they're in certain situations. They didn't expect to be 40 for free. They expect. I think that they were that indulged. The country was that in euphoria about this tournament. I think it was almost like an expectancy that this would just go to plan, and you would see Virat Kohli 100, and you would see Australia skittle for 50 or something like that, and that's the way it would go. I think they've taken their eye off the ball.
Yeah, and this isn't a football podcast at all. However, in 1996 there was a song written about 30 years of hurt.
It's coming home.
There was the expectation of the Euro 96 held in England.
Yeah.
You had players like Gascoigne, a great side put together, playing well, and don't fall at the last hurdle. Fall in the semis to Germany, don't they, in that tournament? But this feels like there's many comparisons, and there's almost a mirror image of where the English Premier League stands in the global game of football, where the Indian Premier League stands in the global game of cricket.
So true.
And the expectation that brings that year in, year out, you see your club sides have the best players in the world and you host the best football in the world.
All the eyes are on you.
And all the
it's
eyes
all
are
about
on
you.
Yeah.
Fly.
This is your game. And, people talk about football coming home to England. In many ways, football would be cricket would be going home in terms of kind of the eyes of the world, the amount of people in India who love the game of cricket. It would be coming home if they won a tournament like this. And it's just that expectation weighs heavy. The shirt weighs heavy.
Yeah.
And every tournament that goes by where you don't make
I've seen someone beating Virat Kohli, a cardboard cut out of Virat Kohli with a stick.
Yeah. Effigies. You know, we've seen effigies of
Did you watch the Beckham Netflix series? I didn't realize, we were too young to understand that, but that was, you look back now and think that was fucking grim, wasn't it?
Yeah. And if you think Beckham was there in this tournament, you know, like almost kind of foreshadowing what was to come, you know, and then you see Kohli's, you know, pin-ups of Kohli being beaten up just like you would have seen Beckham back in the day.
Yeah.
It's
and I think the thing is, Michael Vaughan did a tweet, didn't he? He was saying, is there a country more, is cricket a bigger sport in India than any other sport in the world? And there was, you know, there was Argentina and Brazil with football, but I do think that cricket surpasses the passion for football in those countries.
Yeah.
I really, really do. Do you know what I mean? And
it's just
it's a burden they've got to carry, isn't it?
Yeah. It's massive. And the longer it goes, the harder it is. And this was their moment. Do you know, they had the superstar all-rounder who's unfortunately injured in Pandya, who helped them balance the side.
Yeah.
They had the new pin-up boy of Shubman Gill. They had the experience of Kohli, Rahul, and Rohit.
Yeah.
They had this new superstar in Sky who could come in and replace Pandya. And then you had a bowling attack that the world
wouldn't look out of place alongside the great bowling attacks.
Jadeja, impossible to play in India.
The weird continuing nature of Ashwin not being involved.
Yeah, Shami got the best World Cup record there is of any bowler ever. Bumrah, just an insane fast bowler.
Yeah.
Siraj, the young upstart. He reminds me of Broad sometimes, Siraj.
Yeah.
In terms of you don't really know why he's that good.
Yeah.
But he's a real kind of, he digs in, he battles, he searches for wickets. And then you've got Kuldeep Yadav.
And the thing is, there's a blend of personalities in that India team that make them superstars, but at the same time, that also hinders them. So you think of a team like New Zealand, they're all very much in line, personality-wise. It's a similar talent pool, isn't it, in terms of, you know, all probably raise the games at extra level to make them compete with the bigger teams. But you look at Australia, you've got the superstardom of Kohli, you've got the calm, cool shoulders of Rohit Sharma, you've got the rock star nature of Jadeja, and you've got the sort of attitudey, boisterous kid of Shami, of Siraj. But that final didn't suit Siraj.
No.
Didn't start to go his way. He was soon kicking mud about.
Yeah.
Head was down a little bit. And because there's so many different personalities in that team, and they're almost like you say, almost like a team of individuals, although they've performed so brilliantly as a team up to now, that's when they started to falter a little bit. And they look so out of ideas come the end of that innings, that Australian innings, where you talk about how good that bowling attack was. None of them had an answer for Travis Head or Labuschagne. Yeah. Travis Head got himself out at the end because he wanted to finish in style. He was completely 100,000 people in the stadium, albeit they flooded out quite a bit towards the end. Not the situation of the game and the scenario of the game are completely taken out of that variable.
Yeah.
So again, it's the hindrance of almost the expectation. And, you know, the Indian team must look around and see people coming out that ground, and then they've not experienced that once. Probably in cricket, you know, even in cricket, I know that India pack out most stadiums, but on your stage, for that magnitude, I sometimes think, how do they come back from that?
Yeah, well,
that must be a massive mental scar that's implemented after that.
Where did he go from here? Because this generation probably stick around for the T20 World Cup next year, don't they? Did he try and stick on for the Champions Trophy in 2 years' time? Try and win that? Is that a bit of a push?
Is it
after the Lord?
Is it fulfilling enough? Yeah. A Champions Trophy, would the world sort of look at that and see that as redemption? I don't think they would.
It's currently scheduled in Pakistan, that tournament.
Well, that'll be interesting. One thing I'll also say, it's not now, you know, I think the world has accepted this, but India have made pitches very favourable for themselves, for their game.
Particularly in Test cricket.
What we've also found is, despite probably being a stronger Test team than England, they have travelled and come unstuck away from home.
Yeah.
Because they are fixated on the way they play cricket and the way they believe they can win cricket matches. Is this hindering their progression overseas. We saw them struggle in South Africa in a test series. They lost that as well, didn't they? You know,
that's a big frustration I had in the height of the Anderson Broad years, was when England just rolled out green tops in England
and toppled everybody that came.
And you go away from home and you lose every match because you're just not prepared to. You can't play on anything other than a green top.
Don't get me wrong. You know, in terms of Indian cricket, this is the most variable and balanced bowling attack they've ever had.
Yeah.
And it can clearly do damage abroad. It's won 2 test series in Australia. I'm not saying, I'm trying to get to the core root of the problem, is why they can come to England in a World Cup ODI and get completely dismantled by New Zealand in the semi-final when it's grey one morning in Manchester.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Where's the preparation behind that?
That's where they made a mistake though in this tournament as well, wasn't it? Is if they'd rolled out flat ones, they probably just batter everybody off the park just from the batting. But by bringing, slightly tacky pitches into it, the spinners into it at times, you do give the other opposition a chance.
Yeah.
And I think they just gave Australia a chance in that final with the pitch that they played on. I don't know. I can't see them winning the T20 World Cup next year. I can't see that. No.
For me, that's prime for a bit of an upset. And a reborn England, Australia again, New Zealand are always going to be in and about. The West Indies make a bit of a comeback. A bit close to home. Who knows?
South Africa.
The pressure will be mounting again. There'll be another question saying, when every time someone asks what's India's chances, they'll be, well, they're clearly favourites, but don't forget what happened to them in the final against Australia at the home crowd. This is something this is South Africa's semi-final shake-off. This is England's travelling to Australia in the winters kind of thing. It's stigmas they're going to have to live with, and generations are going to carry that because, like you say, we may not see some of these players. Some of them, we're only a few years, I think, off Kohli calling it a day. That's a significant moment in itself. And I question if he'd won this World Cup, would he have done the same? Would he have retired?
I think he would have. And that is the problem when you get into situations like this is, do you end up holding on to the golden generation for a little bit too long? And therefore the Ishan Kishans underneath, all the batsmen that will come through that kind of replace these guys don't quite have the experience they need to succeed. So you're constantly putting off the next trophy. Almost.
I suppose that's the great thing about cricket, because there's so much of it. You kind of you don't miss those opportunities for your team to collapse and capitulate and then restart. Do you know, if you have football World Cups and rugby World Cups where there's a 4-year gap, you can sort of string it out, can't you? In terms of the same players can probably get by 10 or 12 years. Yeah. The big stages come thick and fast in cricket, especially now we've got T20 and ODI and World Test Championship run at the same time. You can soon find generations going through changeover in the space of 2-3 years, can't you? 100%. Do you know what I mean? We're only talking about England's generation that was only, it seems like yesterday, we're, smashing everybody in the path. So now we're at the point where we're almost said, thanks, been good having you. It's been good while it lasted. We're ready for the new chapter now.
And you think, I was just checking that, sorry. Sky, Yadav, 33. So he's kind of a new player on the block, but he's 33. So it shows...
broke into this team of all-stars.
Yeah.
But now finds himself a little bit of an old man in a young man's team.
On the
after the changeover.
On the international stage, in a World Cup final, probably didn't have enough behind him from an experience perspective to work out how to manage that total, just to get enough to see. A
bit like what Stokes was like in the last T20 tournament. It got England through, not playing the England way in which we've seen in recent years, where they've gone power and they've chased down any total, no matter what the size. Kind of the grit and the clutch kind of player that you needed in that tournament that saw them through.
And sometimes it's just the shirt you're doing it in, isn't it? Is you need experience of winning matches, tight matches, in the international shirt rather than your club shirt, even if it's the same players you're playing against. It's just different sometimes. Anyway, favourite moments of this tournament? What's yours?
How bad is it when your favourite moments are all Australian?
Yeah.
That summarises how poor this tournament's been for England. I think you've got to talk about Maxwell's innings.
Yeah,
that's certainly for me the highlight of the tournament itself. But I think, being honest, Bot, that the overall kind of shock of the final in itself made up for what was a pretty tired looking format, I must say. Not just the format itself, but the I don't know what it is, but like I quite enjoyed the round robin kind of phase in England, and I think that's because the contrast between home crowds and the home and away, not home and away, but the balance between crowds was much better because England's a lot more multicultural. So if you were playing South Africa, West Indies, you get a nice blend. Or if Pakistan were playing, it was like a home crowd in Pakistan. Vice versa, India. England, Australia, always a good occasion. And I think this tournament's missed that. It's been great that India, as we've got onto the later stages of the tournament, the crowds have been big, and we've seen a thriving cricket sort of country. But ask yourself, if India had bombed in this tournament,
that would have been bloody hell.
Can you see how poor this tournament would have actually carried out been? With respect, if this tournament had been South Africa, New Zealand final, I'm sure it'd have been full because it's a World Cup final, but wouldn't carry the same sort of grand finales as sort of Australia and India looks. And I think a lot of this tournament has been structured so the big teams can play each other more. And we discussed this on the last pod, and not to go through it, it's whether that long term is going to stick.
I don't. I think they're changing it, and I don't like the table format. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't make it feel like a World Cup. As close as you could get to the formats that you see in rugby and football World Cups, in terms of groups that kind of pyramid up to a final, the better. In terms of the format itself, the 50 over one days, I do still love it. I mean, I know I am a cricket fan and probably isn't for everybody, but again, a mutual friend texted me on Sunday and talked about the twists and turns that 50 overs provides in comparison to 20 overs. And I do think that's true. I'm still kind of a miserable sod, and it's Test, ODI, T20s for me. I do prefer this World Cup versus the one that was in Australia, the T21 last year.
I think some of one of the main things I've enjoyed from this tournament is the spontaneousness of all the teams don't really know where they're at. And in the end, we've had such a movement in white ball cricket to where, scores of 280 and below are frowned upon as as kind of not quite there, not good enough. To the point where we've seen some of the old fashioned cricket creep back in. We've seen teams where they need to sort of dig in a little bit, where, we've lost a few wickets, we need to steady the ship. That's how cricket used to be. And I think it's been a kind reminder to the world a little bit of like, there's still elements of skill to this game beyond hitting the ball to the boundary. And I think that's where this tournament will find itself. It'll find itself in a situation where bilateral cricket won't exist. So the preparation will be everybody's excuse. But you pick your best Test and T20 players and you see who's got the minerals. Do you know what I mean? You said it well about Australia's bowling attack. Hazelwood, Stark, Cummins. They're all good enough bowlers. And, I think it was... who did I hear? It was Kemar Roach actually come on a podcast with the Wisdom podcast, and he said, "I'm of the believer now that the game has advanced so much. If you are good enough, you can play any format."
And in some ways, does it matter if all the teams are underprepared and you turn up and see how it is? If you think about the Ryder Cup, nobody. They
throw a group of individuals together. They have a few pep talks. They have a senior golfer who's in his later stages, retired maybe on the senior tour, give them a few wise words. They strike up a few friendships and they go.
And the best team wins. But that's
fun.
My understanding is that's the pinnacle of golf. That's what everyone loves.
But it's kind of like international football, isn't it? I know you have friendlies here and there, but it's still clubmen all thrown together, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So
I was less so, looking towards the excuse that we've not played enough ODIs. I just kind of thought we looked a bit over the hill in the end. And I think you made your peace for that, didn't you?
Yeah, and in some ways as well, if you throw everyone together, there'll be some teams that don't show up. There'll be some teams that do show up. That's all part of the fun.
There's too many good cricket nations for everyone to have a good tournament.
There's some great cricket in this tournament.
South Africa, I think, have been a revelation in terms of that. We were talking 3-4 years ago that they were heading for abyss, weren't they? They're heading for
West Indies level capitulation.
Yeah, but they've bagged themselves a lucrative IPL-backed franchise tournament that has taken off pretty well, in terms of attendance and engagement. They've got Graham Smith at the helm in the chief seat, which I think's, it makes the name Graham Smith in South Africa kind of makes me feel comfortable. They looked a pretty balanced side on this. They've fallen short Could they have won it on another occasion? They wouldn't have let out of place as winners, but I think they'll take a lot from this tournament going into next couple of tournaments, and they're now looking something like a nation, aren't they?
Yeah.
A well-balanced nation, and talent coming through at the same time. So look, everyone's going to have cycles, and I think, like I said to you earlier in this podcast, the amount of opportunities now for international tournaments means that we get to see more of these nations where they're up to in shorter spaces of time than 4 years. So that's a positive.
Can I give you my moment of the tournament? I think my moment of the tournament was, although it wasn't ultimately successful for Afghanistan, it was those first overs when Australia were batting that Afghanistan had a 90 for 7.
Completely rocked.
Afghanistan at that point, they had a foot in the semi-finals, really.
They were rattled Australia, weren't they? At that point?
If they'd gone on to win that match, obviously Maxwell comes in and does incredible things to be up there in the greatest ever white ball innings. But seeing Afghanistan take Australia that close in where they were in the table, and then probably would have gone on. I think if they win that, they go on to make the semis. That's an incredible feat, and I suppose
that's a defining moment, because I think if they win that and Australia, tail off, I think India walked the tournament.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that moment alone, being your favourite moment, could have been the definitive moment.
Yeah. But also, I suppose, we talk a lot about growing the game, the international game, why it shouldn't be just a closed boys club for the big nations. Afghanistan have shown in this tournament what the smaller nations, the ones with less resource available to them, how they can perform when they get a talented group of cricketers together, and why they should always have access to the World Cup, because
it's a nation
to the World Cup, isn't it?
Well, it's a cricket nation that's been spawned in less than 50 years.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was. I'm right by thinking that it was kind of Pakistani influence that's kind of in war-torn years that's kind of educated the public, and it's fastly become a national sport, hasn't it?
Yeah, my understanding is it was the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in the 90s, and lots of the families and parents of these players obviously fled to refugee camps in Pakistan, where they socialised with the communities and learned about cricket, honed their skills.
Fell in love with the game.
Yeah, fell in love with the game. And I suppose that's a brilliant... well, obviously it comes from a place of not being the nicest of origins, but actually the output of these players playing for Pakistan, giving people hope in playing for Afghanistan, giving people hope in Afghanistan. It's brilliant.
And Kevin Peterson said something when we were talking, they did a bit of a touch on Afghanistan. They were getting bowlers and they were getting all-rounders, but the next phase of them is to get batters. Yeah. And it looks like they've started to get some batters, which is, good to see. Hopefully we can see more of that in all formats of cricket. So, I guess it goes without saying, well done, Australia.
Yes, the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
Just.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't quite as good as 2019, was it? Let's be honest.
No.
We can call it that.
Yeah, we had a better final.
Yeah, this episode is dedicated to a friend of ours, Ned, in Australia, who's suffered a horrific-looking sort of leg break. I think he's morphined up now listening to this podcast in a Melbourne hospital. We wish you well, Ned, and congratulations on your victory. Hope you can get a few games in this year. We're the 212 men. We'll be back soon. Interviews, more cricket coverage. Cricket never stops. And there'll be plenty more to come following this, won't there?
Definitely.
Take care, guys. See you later.
Cheers.